Hello, this is Jane, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the April 30 issue of the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And right off the front page, there's a big headline that reads Runway Inflation. Critics question plan to extend airstrip by 600 meters to accommodate jets. And this is accompanied by an aerial view of the Toronto airport. And underneath the picture, it says the Toronto Port Authority, which owns and operates, it's the Billy Bishop Airport, which owns and operates Billy Bishop Airport, said the runway would be extended mainly to the west towards Ontario Place, minimizing the impact on the Inner Harbor and waterfront housing plans. And the main article is further inside the newspaper, and there's another headline there that says, Runway Plan Shocks Critics. No Jets TO Chair blasts call to add 600 meters for jets. And this is by Estella Wren. Twice the height of the Eiffel Tower and no longer than the CN Tower. That's what came to mind for Norm DePasquale when he heard that Billy Bishop Airport's runway could be extended by more than 600 meters to accommodate jets, on top of the 150-meter runway and safety zones already being planned. I'm absolutely shocked, said DePasquale, the chair of No Jets TO. This is longer than they've ever asked for. Community associations raised concerns after the Globe and Mail revealed this week that the Toronto Port Authority is looking to expand the island airport's runway more than anticipated. According to emails sent from the Port Authority to the Star, the plan is to extend the main runway from its current length of 1,216 meters to up to 1,830 meters, bringing the total end-to-end landmass to more than 2,000 meters. The 600-meter extension proposed is far longer than Porter Airlines' 213 plan, which called for 200-meter extensions on either side of the runway as part of its push to bring jets to Billy Bishop, a plan ultimately shelved after opposition from the city and the Trudeau government in 2015. The majority of the extension would be to the west, with the goal of minimizing impacts on the Inner Harbor and planned housing developments along the waterfront, said Toronto Port Authority's Vice President of Communications and Public Affairs, Deborah Wilson, adding that only the runway buffer zone will be added to the east. The federally mandated Port Authority is limiting its study to single-aisle aircraft with a noise profile that is at least as good as that of the Bombardier Q400 currently in operation, Wilson added. The airport currently runs about 150 commercial flights on a weekday, 100 fewer than it has slots available, the Toronto Port Authority has said. Ford has said the airport, which served fewer than 2 million passengers last year, would grow to serve 10 million under the TPA modernization plan. The runway expansion is being welcomed by Gilles Gerson, president of and CEO of the Toronto Region Board of Trade, who said in a statement that modernizing the airport could add up to $8.5 billion annually to the economy. The fact that most of the proposed runway extension would stretch west into Lake Ontario does not offer comfort to DePasquale of No Jets TO, who says it would make the east side less safe and cut off the western gap. DePasquale said jet engines can generate powerful exhaust blasts during takeoff, which could pose a risk to kayakers and canoeists in the Inner Harbor. even with a blast barrier in place. He is worried the extended runway will also block the Western Gap. As the runway pushes closer to Trillium Park and Ontario Place, De Pasquale said residents and visitors enjoying the waterfront there would no longer be spared the constant noise and force of jet blasts. That's not going to be a very relaxing experience at Ontario Place, he said. Why did we spend all that money on Ontario Place? Ed Hoare, chair of Waterfront for All, said he is concerned an extension is being rushed without addressing issues flagged in studies. Studies by the experts are talking about a much, much less intrusive runway than what we're now talking about, Hoare said. So presumably the consequences are larger now. Wilson, speaking for the Toronto Port Authority, said the agency is working on a study of a runway extension that would deliver community benefits, including quieter operations and removing building restrictions in the East Harbor and Uquaman-Minising. Brahman Thalanathan, spokesperson for Mayor Olivia Chow, said it is not a transparent process for the mayor to learn of new developments through the media. Liberal Spadina Harbourfront MP Chi Nguyen, who does not oppose considering the expansion in line with federal government's position so far, said she is still awaiting a formal plan to assess the expansion and that residents deserve full transparency. Neil Betteridge, chair of the Development Committee at the Gooderham and Warts Neighborhood Association, also called for more transparency. Shifting more of the runway extension into the lake to the west might help reduce impacts on inner harbor boating while still exacting a toll on planned affordable housing on Uquaman-Minising, given Transport Canada standards for jet flight paths, Betteridge said. The next article is under the byline of Star Exclusive. Perks won't run for re-election to City Council. Left-wing standard bearer was effective critic of Ford and Tory. And this is by Ben Spur. City Hall is about to lose one of its strongest voices, Gord Perks, whose impassioned rhetoric and procedural know-how have made him an irritant to conservative mayors for 2 decades, has decided not to run for re-election this fall. The decision, which Perks confirmed to the Star in an exclusive interview, means that for the first time since 2006, after nominations for Toronto's October 26 municipal election open on Friday, he won't be among those filing his papers. His retirement will mark the departure of one of Toronto's most prominent council members and leave a vacuum on City Hall's left. It may also be welcome news to the councillor's critics, who have accused him of disregarding residents' concerns and stifling dissent on policies he supports. I tried to persuade him not to retire, Mayor Olivia Chow said with a laugh, revealing that she offered Perks a lighter workload to convince him to stay. A former New Democrat MP, the mayor said she had admired Perks since his pre-council days as an environmental activist. We're going to miss him, said Chow, who has yet to announce her own intentions for this year's election. Seated in his council office, where a Socialist Worker Party poster hangs on the wall, Perks, 62, his silver hair and a boyish part, said he has always been uncomfortable with the trappings of an elected official. He has long insisted people call him Gord instead of Counselor, because I hate it, he said. He explained his decision not to run again in Parkdale High Park was due in part to his concern that after 20 years, his political persona was threatening to become too much a part of his identity. I got tired of talking to people about what kind of person Counselor Gord Perks is, he said. Shedding that official image is both something I absolutely need to do and also really scary. For an unnatural politician, Perks has taken to the job in ways many of his colleagues never have. He's known for an exhaustive knowledge of council procedure and for closely reading staff reports, as well as for weaponizing that expertise for political ends. According to former councilor Adam Vaughn, Perks knows how to stick handle complex issues through the council system. Vaughn, who describes Perks as his closest friend in politics, recalled that he used an obscure budget maneuver to help kill off the controversial Front Street extension early in the pair's council careers. He is easily one of the smartest people to ever sit on city council, Vaughn said. Perks was first elected in 2006, a close ally of then-Mayor David Miller. He championed climate initiatives and the Transit City plan that led to the Finch and Eglinton LRT lines. In 2023, he was tapped by Chow to chair Council's Housing Committee, where he has advanced a city program to purchase rental units and keep them affordable, and spearheaded Toronto's public builder housing model. But perhaps fittingly for a former activist, Perks famously crashed then Premier David Peterson's 1990 campaign launch to play an audio recording slamming his environmental record. When asked about his proudest moment at City Hall, the first thing that Perks mentioned was his work opposing those in power. From 2010 to 2023, Perks was the chair of the city's Progressive Caucus, the unofficial opposition to mayors Rob Ford and John Tory. According to Perks, 2 weeks after the 2010 election, he met with fellow left-leaning members Janet Davis, Shelley Carroll, and Vaughn, and over a long lunch drafted a memo about how are we going to stop Ford's project. By forging strategic alliances with centrist councilors and coordinating strategy on the council floor, the group's members say they played a key role in stymieing Ford's plan for a waterfront casino, citywide privatization of garbage collection, and deeper cuts to public services. After Tory was elected in 2014, Perks was as dogged a critic of the new mayor as he had been of Ford, hammering Tory over policies such as his Smart Track transit plan. But Tory retains a respect for his former sparring partner. We disagree on many things, and for sure he was partisan, but almost never personal, Tory said in a text, stressing that while they were on opposite sides of disputes, at all times the motivation was to try to find the right path for the city. For longtime council watchers, Perks' career will be defined by his speeches. His February 2023 remarks on the dry subject of the annual budget elicited applause in the normally sedate chamber as he excoriated colleagues who claimed they couldn't find more funding for housing and youth programs. Anytime someone tells you that the wealthiest city in Canada can't provide somewhere to live for everybody who lives here, he said, what is actually happening is that some in this chamber won't. Some of his most powerful speeches have referenced his sister Sharon, who died by suicide 3 decades ago after experiencing mental health problems and homelessness. Perks described her as an utterly brilliant person, failed by social services that should have helped. His sense of her lost potential has motivated his career long push for stronger supports for the vulnerable. Our society, at its deepest level, is organized to make the wealthy wealthier. It is not organized to make it possible for everyone to live their best life, he said. It just hurts seeing people who can't live their best life. There have been times when Perk's passion has got the better of him. In 2012, he looked close to coming to blows with Councillor Giorgio Mammoliti in the council chamber after Perks took exception to him criticizing city staff. Perks soon apologized, and to critics, his high-minded rhetoric can come off as self-righteous, his adherence to procedure pedantic. Last July, residents who showed up to the Housing Committee to object to new homeless shelters were livid when he tried to restrict discussion to the technical zoning changes before the committee, rather than the shelters themselves. Perk's ruling may have been technically correct, but Councillor Brad Bradford, Beaches, East York, accused him of trying to shut down debate using legalese. There are also signs that constituents in Parkdale and Hyde Park are ready for a change. In the last election in 2022, Perks won with only about 36% of the vote, down from 55% in 2014. The councilor's relationship with constituents is mixed, that's for sure, said Greg Homonilo, who lives in the ward. Homonilo and others have been advocating against the city's redevelopment of the Swansea Mews Community Housing Complex and allege that Perks isn't listening to their concerns. The councilor has lost touch with, and residents feel betrayed, Homonilo said. Perks acknowledged that in the last election he felt a change in how I related to the people I represent. He attributed it in part to politics becoming more toxic after COVID-19 and Premier Doug Ford's 2018 decision to double the size of each council ward. Perks now represents more than 100,000 constituents instead of about 56,000, making it harder to connect. A lot of ways that I was engaging with the community I just had to cut out, Perks said. But the councilor, who has argued residents have no more right to prevent a homeless shelter in their community than they do to bar residents on racial grounds, makes no apologies for advocating for policies he believes in, even if it alienates constituents. I think a candidate's job is to say, "This is who I am. This is what I believe," and leave it up to voters to decide whether that's how they want to be represented, he said. The open race to succeed Perks is likely to be hotly contested. Diana Chan McNally, an advocate on issues of homelessness, is among those rumored to be considering a run. Chan McNally declined to comment. Perks said he doesn't know what he'll do this fall once the term is up and he sheds his council identity. But he knows that he won't be doing "I have a secret pact with another member of the council that if either of us becomes a lobbyist, the other is allowed to assassinate them," he said. And I need to pause for a moment to remind you you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The next article is from the front page, and it's under the byline of security. Canada has chosen to host Defense Bank. Proposed new global institution would support financing for military investment. And this is by Anna Pereira and Josh Rubin. The headquarters of a new global defense bank will be in Canada. The federal government confirmed late Wednesday night. In a press release, the government said delegates from member countries voted in favor of Canada hosting the new Defense, Security, and Resilience Bank, that's DSRB, during negotiations that concluded in Montreal on Wednesday. Federal Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne said Canada is looking forward to getting the proposed new bank up and running, but acknowledged there's still plenty of work to do. These negotiations are a crucial step in taking the DSRB from idea to reality and launching this new defense-focused multilateral bank. The time to act is now, and I look forward to continuing working with our partners to establish and launch the DSRB, Champagne said. Earlier Wednesday, a source said Canada was the unanimous choice among 19 member countries to headquarter the proposed institution, but the source cautioned there's a chance the plan won't end up being realized. There's still a lot of work to do, but Canada will definitely be the host if the bank goes ahead, they said. The Star granted the source anonymity because they were not authorized to speak publicly about the matter. The decision, first reported by the Globe and Mail, was made after the third round of negotiations on the bank's structure wrapped up in Montreal on Wednesday. The first round of in-person discussions began March 23rd, also in Montreal. In this context, Canada is playing a leading role, building on its broader efforts to strengthen national defense and support its defense industrial base, the Federal Finance Department wrote in a March news release. The DSRB's goal is to address financing challenges facing democratic countries as they aim to secure borders and boost military spending amid a new era of geopolitical uncertainty. The bank will be owned exclusively by up to 40 nation states, according to the DSRB Development Group's website. It will be designed to mobilize low-cost capital needed for defense, security, and resilience investments for NATO members and allied nations. Supporting the creation of the bank are several private sector partners, including all of Canada's big six banks: BMO, CIBC, National Bank, RBC, Scotiabank, and TD. Deutsche Bank and JP Morgan are also backers. The DSRB's development group did not immediately respond to the Star's request for comment. David Perry, head of the Canadian Global Affairs Institute, welcomed the news. I think it shows that Prime Minister Mark Carney's gone a long way to restore Canadian standing and confidence amongst other partners and allies on defense issues, Perry said. I think it would have been extremely unlikely for this initiative to land with Canadian leadership 2 years ago. In February, Carney launched Canada's first defense industrial strategy, seeking to boost defense exports by 50% within a decade. A month later, the federal government announced it hit NATO's defense spending target of 2% of GDP. But several organizations, including the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives and the Canadian Association of Professional Employees, have recently denounced Canada's participation in the Defence Bank. In an open letter published April 14, the groups argue that the initiative would take away from social and environmental needs and direct it towards arms manufacturers. Financing war won't bring us peace, they wrote. The host city for the DSRB has yet to be announced. In December, Premier Doug Ford and Mayor Olivia Chow made a joint bid for the bank to be located in Toronto. Ottawa, Montreal, and Vancouver have also expressed interest. The Star reached out to Chow's office but did not receive a response in time for publication. A senior provincial official, speaking on condition of anonymity, told the Star the government had not yet heard any confirmation about the bank, which could create 3,500 high-paying jobs, will be located in Canada. The official reiterated Ford's argument that Toronto should be the host city. Toronto is the only logical place for it to be as the financial capital of the country. And the next article is under the title 20 Years in Isolation. Mental Health Review Kept Secret. Province conducts confidential probe of system at heart of Star investigation by Jacques Gallant. Amid outcry over patients being kept in long-term isolation at an Ontario psychiatric hospital, the provincial government has been conducting a secret review of the forensic mental health system, the Star has learned. The Ministry of Health has so far not responded to calls from advocates for an independent and public review in the wake of an ongoing Star investigation into the use of seclusion at Waypoint Center for Mental Health Care, the province's only maximum security forensic facility in Penetanguishene. But emails show that the ministry reached out to individuals who work in the field in February, asking to have a confidential discussion exploring Ontario's forensic mental health system. The ministry asked that anyone willing to participate sign a non-disclosure agreement. The NDA states that participants would be receiving confidential information. It is essential that unauthorized parties do not receive such information, as the interests of the province may be impacted. The forensic mental health system encompasses individuals with mental illnesses who have come into contact with the criminal justice system, namely those found unfit to stand trial or not criminally responsible. While the ministry email doesn't specify what prompted the review nor its terms of reference, the request for a discussion came 1 month after the Star broke the story of Camelot Hamblet, a man with treatment-resistant schizophrenia who has spent the last 20 years and counting in seclusion at Waypoint. His story was met with horror in January by judges of the Court of Appeal, who ordered an independent assessment of his case. The Star has since explored Hamblet's case in greater depth as part of the ongoing series 20 Years in Isolation. Dr. Gary Kayamowitz, the former head of forensic security at St. Joseph's Healthcare in Hamilton, who has been involved in the review, said it's standard for the province to take a look at the system every 10 years or so, and that the ongoing review would not have been prompted by anything in particular. Hamblet's lawyer, Anita Zaghetti, who was asked to participate in the review, said she's never heard of such a thing in her 3 decades specializing in mental health law. She was contacted in mid-February by Diana Cochran, manager of the ministry's Forensic and Justice Unit, asking to schedule a meeting. Your expertise and perspectives are highly valued, and we believe your input will make an important contribution to informing advice to government, Cochran wrote. We appreciate your continued collaboration on this important issue. Before she could schedule the meeting and share a list of discussion questions, Cochran asked Szigeti to sign an NDA to support an open and candid dialogue. Szigeti refused. I have to wonder if any lawyer would do so without knowing more about the request or project at hand, she wrote back to Cochran. Szigeti nevertheless outlined her concerns about the system in her response. The state of the system today is the poorest I've seen, she wrote. She said that a lack of services in the system is causing a bottleneck that is preventing people from being discharged and leading to unacceptable wait times for transfers between facilities. People locked into seclusion for decades at Waypoint is also bad, Szigeti wrote. The Ministry of Health did not respond to questions from the Star as to what prompted the review, its terms of reference, and whether the results would be made public. Ottawa-based human rights lawyer Paul Champ, who is not connected to the review, said there's no question that the government likely sees a number of legal risks with this review, hence the ministry's emphasis on confidentiality. He said governments tend to worry that if they do a review and find something wrong, they'll then be held responsible, which creates a barrier to change. But that's the role of government. They need to own up to mistakes if there have, in fact, been systemic abuses taking place here, he said. In my view, they should be transparent in the review to try to identify what went wrong. The Star's investigation has revealed that people have been kept in seclusion for years, and in Hamblett's case, for decades, at Waypoint. This despite the fact that, according to psychiatrists and Waypoint's own policy, seclusion is meant to be an emergency measure of last resort to address imminent risk of harm and to be used for as brief a time as possible due to its detrimental impact on a person's mental health. Leading experts, including the mental health professionals behind the best practices to reduce seclusion at Waypoint claims to be implementing, have described the hospital's practice as egregious, abusive, and grossly in excess of other North American facilities. Waypoint said this week that it has and will continue to participate in any sector-wide reviews of the forensic mental health system by independent third parties, government, or other organizations. The hospital did not respond to a follow-up question as to whether it is currently participating in any review. And I need to pause once more to remind you that you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The next article is under the byline Tumbler Ridge. Gigi visits grieving BC town. Families will seek $1 billion in lawsuits against OpenAI. And this says it's just by the Canadian Press. Governor General Mary Simon says returning to Tumbler Ridge, British Columbia, almost 3 months after the tragic mass shooting in the community is an experience that will stay with her for a long time. Simon said Wednesday that she wanted to come back to the northeastern BC community to meet families of victims and frontline workers whom she said didn't get to spend time with in February. She came for a vigil shortly after the shooting with Prime Minister Mark Carney, all other federal party leaders and BC politicians. I'm from a culture that is a firm believer of connection with people, and I felt that I could perhaps bring a little comfort to them and be there. And if they wanted to talk to me about what they were experiencing, I did that, she said in an interview after spending 2 days in the community. Simon met with some of the families of people who died and said the grief and healing looked different for everyone, but added there are supports in place to help those in need. Of course, they are still experiencing a tremendous amount of grief having lost their child, but they're very resilient people and they're coming together as a community to get through this. And you can see the determination to get beyond this horrible event, she said. On February 10, Jessie Van Rootselaar killed her mother and half-brother in their home before going to the high school where she killed 5 students, a teaching assistant, then herself. The tragedy placed the small community into the international spotlight, and Simon said they are still receiving cards of support from around the world. I think that is helping them to go through the journey of grieving and healing. And I think these things matter. They're little acts of kindness, and that is important, she said. Also Wednesday, an American-based legal firm announced it will represent some of the victims and their family members in 7 separate lawsuits against OpenAI and its founder, Sam Altman. The legal action alleges the artificial intelligence company didn't warn police when its staff noted the killer's troubling behavior with OpenAI's chat box, ChatGPT. Altman said in a letter last week that he was deeply sorry the company didn't alert law enforcement. A co-counsel for the family says they'll be seeking more than $1 billion, that's in US dollars, from the company in the wrongful death lawsuit. In 7 overlapping lawsuits, the Tumbler Ridge plaintiffs allege that in addition to their failure to warn authorities, OpenAI and Altman aided and abetted the shooting. OpenAI has not responded to a request for comment. But in a statement released on its website on Tuesday, OpenAI said it was constantly improving the steps we take to help protect people and communities, and that mass shootings, threats against public officials, bombing attempts, and attacks on communities and individuals are an unacceptable and grave reality. In the lawsuits, the victims and their families allege OpenAI made a conscious decision not to notify police about Van Rootselaar's activity, knowing that adding proper safety protocols to ChatGPT would cost the company market share. The plaintiffs also allege that deactivating the shooter's account was misleading because the company provided clear instructions to users on how to create new accounts. OpenAI has said that Van Rootselaar had a second account in addition to the one that was shut down. The next article is titled Toronto Mortgage Lender Defiant. Harold, the mortgage closer, says he'll keep fighting despite bans and fines. This is by Kevin Donovan. Harold, the mortgage closer, is not giving up. Hit with $280,000 in fines and an order to permanently stop lending mortgages, he says he will battle on against what he says is unfair treatment by Ontario's financial regulator. I keep fighting, says Harold Gerstel, the man behind 2 companies accused of financially hurting vulnerable people. Should a person let himself be trampled for nothing? In its ruling, the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario came out swinging, saying Gerstel's testimony was argumentative, evasive, and manipulative, and generally lacked credibility. The enforcement action was sparked 4 years ago by a Toronto Star investigation into a mortgage deal that Gerstel and his companies had with the late Judy Allen, a senior who eventually lost her North York bungalow to Gerstel. The Star stories prompted FSRA to look deeply into Gerstel's activities. The regulator found cases where Gerstel's effective interest rate, including lending fees, was as high as 76%. Canada's criminal code has set 60% as the highest legal interest rate allowed. The regulator also found that while Gerstel did have his own mortgage brokerage, he at times did business outside his brokerage, which the regulator said deprived the borrowers of legal protection. Gerstel told the Star that his sending mortgage deals to other lenders was not different than what happens thousands of times every week in the mortgage world. In this latest move by the regulator, Gerstel has been told to stop doing mortgages, and a series of fines totaling $210,000 was levied against Gerstel and his companies for failing to comply with regulatory obligations that protect borrowers and lenders. He was previously fined $70,000 for failing to cooperate with the regulator's investigation. Gerstel is a larger-than-life Toronto businessman known for television ads offering fast, no-hassle mortgages and his Harold the Jewelry Buyer business promising cash for gold. In an interview this week, Gerstel told the Star that the regulator got everything wrong in its judgment. He intends to appeal both the ruling and the imposition of fines to Ontario's Divisional Court, a branch of the Superior Court of Justice. Gerstel says he has always provided an important service to clients. The bottom line is we didn't put anybody into a bad situation, Gerstel said, adding that the lenders who have complained about him were already in a desperate situation. In Allen's case, which touched off the probe, the regulator found that over a 6-month period in 2021, Gerstel registered 4 mortgages totaling $1,120,000 against the retired nurse's North York bungalow. But Allen only received $573,760. The remainder of the money was held back as lending fees and prepaid interest. As the Star reported, Allen wanted to age in place and intended to do some modest renovations to her home. The contractor involved in the work was charged with fraud in relation to the case and 14 other homeowners, but died before his trial. The regulator found that the effective interest rate Allen was charged ranged from 51% and 56%. As the Star previously reported, the renovations were shoddily done, unsafe, and never completed. Allen said she had been financially ruined by the situation. Allen died in 2023. Her house had been sold by a Gerstel-related company under power of sale. Asked by the Star this week if he was still lending money, Gerstel said, "No, I can't do more of these now because I don't have a license." The next article is Brothers Face New Firearm Offensives by Daniya Yacoub. 2 brothers acquitted by a Toronto jury in 2024 murder trial are facing new charges in a firearm and drug investigation. Toronto police executed a search warrant in the Danforth Road and Eglinton Avenue East area on the evening of April 21. As a result of the search, a loaded 9mm handgun and a quantity of oxycodone was seized, police said. 3 men were arrested as part of the investigation, police said in a Thursday release. Brothers Elvis and Kareem Kadu, 29 and 30, are facing charges including possession of an unloaded regulated firearm, possessing a firearm knowing it's unauthorized, possessing a firearm without license, and also the possession of a Schedule 1 substance. A third man, 22, faces 2 additional charges, including failure to comply with a probation order and possession of a firearm or ammunition contrary to prohibition order. Karim Kadu was acquitted by a jury of 2 counts of first-degree murder in 2024 after he admitted to shooting a man in Scarborough in 2021 out of defense. Elvis, who was accused of being an accomplice, was also acquitted in the same case. The incident on the evening of June 13, 2021, was partly caught on video, but it was self-defense, Karim would later tell the jury at his murder trial. Mohammed Moalem, 23, and Daniel Fung, 25, were armed, Karim testified, although no guns belonging to the victims were found at the scene. And I'm going to pause one last time to remind you you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And this next article is under the byline Ryan Wedding case. Judge dismisses accused hitman's fishing expedition, and that's in quotes. Accused closer to extradition to the U.S. as request for more evidence denied. That's by Calvi Leon. A Toronto man facing charges in the United States on accusations he was hired to murder an enemy of Ryan Wedding's cocaine empire is one step closer to extradition after a Superior Court judge denied his request for more evidence in the case. In a downtown courtroom on Wednesday, Superior Court of Justice Catherine Weller sided with the Crown's arguments that Malik Cunningham's application for additional disclosure has all the hallmarks of a fishing expedition in the hope that it might reveal a charter violation. Cunningham, 24, was initially arrested on April 14, 2024, following a traffic stop in York Region. His arrest, an apparent coincidence, came 2 weeks after he allegedly killed a Niagara Falls man on behalf of an international cocaine empire that authorities say was led by the ex-Olympian Wedding and fellow Canadian Andrew Clark. Clark, who has since begun cooperating with U.S. authorities against Wedding, is charged with ordering Cunningham to kill Randy Fader, 29, who was shot in the head in his driveway on April 1, 2024. While American authorities have alleged that Wedding and Clark would order hits on rivals or enemies who owed money to their drug ring, they have not disclosed a reason for the hit on Fader. In an application argued in court earlier this month, Cunningham's lawyer, Jassy Vamadevan, asked the Attorney General of Canada to hand over key evidence behind what he described as a made-in-Canada investigation. He said the evidence allegedly linking Cunningham to Fader's murder almost entirely relies on the seizure of his client's white iPhone, which was seized and searched by Canadian police. In court records, U.S. prosecutors say it contained data and encrypted messages detailing conversations between Cunningham and Clark about various murder-for-hire plots, including Fader's. While Vamadevan initially asked for all materials relating to the seizure of the white iPhone, he later narrowed the request to information related to the search warrant and the results detailing what was found on the device. The lawyer argued the record of the case, the summary of the FBI's evidence filed in Canadian court, does not include sufficient information to allow him to determine how the evidence was obtained and whether it complied with the charter or is otherwise admissible under Canadian law. Crown Attorney Candia Aird countered that the defense's position was, quote, speculative, unquote, at one point claiming Vamadevan does not understand the extradition process. She said his arguments were contradicted by the court filings that detail what the police investigation entailed, what information they had prior to executing the warrant, and the parameters for searching the iPhone. The judge agreed. In her decision Wednesday, Weiler said the key issue is whether Cunningham is entitled to this level of disclosure in an extradition context. She noted that an accused person's disclosure rights are more limited in extradition cases, covering only evidence required to make a case for committal and to determine whether the requesting state complied with the charter. Siding with the Crown, the judge found Cunningham did not meet the required test to establish allegations of misconduct or charter violations. She also rejected his claim that this was an exceptional case. After the judge dismissed the motion, the Crown and Weiler discussed setting a date for Cunningham's extradition hearing. Vamadevin, however, asked the court to hold off until a decision was made in a separate joint application by the Toronto Star and the CBC for disclosure in the case. In that case, both media outlets are seeking to unseal the very search warrant request that Vamadevin sought to obtain. At a hearing in St. Catharines earlier this month, the Star and CBC were granted a redacted version of the document. The judge is expected to decide whether to unseal more or all of the material in the coming weeks. The next article is titled Labor Shortage May Persist. Need for skilled trades workers will outweigh boost from $6 billion federal plan. This is by Mark Ramsey. Ottawa, a newly announced $6 billion effort to recruit and train trades workers may only put a dent in fixing the labor shortage needed to build, baby build, according to the federal government's own numbers. A mix of retirements and projected economic growth means Canada will need more than 1.4 million additional trades workers by 2033. Prime Minister Mark Carney said Wednesday as he touted the new program in Gatineau. His government aims to address that shortage with 100,000 new skilled and nationally certified workers in the next 5 years, using a mix of wage subsidies, income bonuses, and money for training facilities. That gap highlights the labor challenges ahead as Ottawa embarks on a massive effort to boost housing construction, develop natural resources and infrastructure, and upgrade Canada's defense capabilities. Trevor Stratton, an economist at the consulting firm Deloitte, called Carney's target definitely a step in the right direction, but noted that the government has very ambitious building targets and objectives, and so more will probably be needed for us to fully meet those. Stratton co-wrote a report last year that warned labor supply will have to meet rising demand from major projects in the coming years, especially if those projects hit their peak need for workers at the same time. In a recent perfect storm of energy projects in British Columbia and a large expansion of Alberta's oil sands in the early 2000s, the result was bidding wars for electricians, welders, crane operators, and concrete crews, schedule delays, and spiraling costs, the October report said. If the build, baby, build ambitions materialize, the national jobs market could start to look a lot like British Columbia and Alberta at peak overlap, when it was not a shortage of money or projects holding back activity, but the lack of available workers. The report had a better outlook for Canada's labor shortage than the numbers outlined in the Carney government's fiscal update this week, projecting the need for 500,000 new trade workers by 2030 and as many as 800,000 by 2024. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre said the Carney government was too late to the party and accused anti-development liberal laws and taxes of leaving 200,000 trades workers unemployed. While we want to train more, we're worried they're going to come into a job market where there's no paychecks for them, he told reporters Wednesday. Canadian Labour Congress President Bea Bruske told the Star she was still concerned about the shortage, even if the initiative is a really important and good step. She said more needs to be done to attract people to the trades, including by further investments in social supports like childcare. Housing Minister Gregor Robertson said he's not worried. It will take some time, but we're also gearing up with home building to double the pace over the next decade, Robertson told reporters Wednesday. We have two approaches, one with training and apprenticeship, retraining in industries that are harder hit, and we can deploy people to build housing and infrastructure projects, but also looking at modernizing the home building industry. At the same time, the federal government's new program does not represent all recruiting efforts nationwide because initiatives are also underway at the provincial level, said Tricia Williams, the head of research at the Future Skills Center. Ottawa's initiative is also targeting young Canadians for Real Seal certification, which gives trades workers the ability to move and work anywhere in the country. I actually feel like the government took on the hardest part of the challenge, she said. What's going to be needed to put all this into action will be coordination. Carney said his government is launching the program because we need to expand, speed up, and make more effective our training and apprenticeship programs. There are lots of issues right now. There are too few seats in those programs today. The certification path is long. It's tough to start, it's confusing to start, he said, outlining the program's aim to halve the time it takes tradespeople to get certified across Canada. The steps are disconnected, so people fall out through the way. Too many employers won't take a chance on a first-year apprentice. And I will end here with you've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the April 30 issue of the Toronto Star. Your reader has been Jane. Thank you for listening.